thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
And the way that we've started out these conversations is the first thing I need you to tell me is about, we go back to the beginning.
Okay.
What made you decide to become a lawyer? And tell us about your law school experience.
I don't have any lawyers in my family at all. And I initially was actually headed down a different path. And then I don't know that I have a great light bulb moment, except I was actually abroad. I was already accepted into an MBA program. And I just thought, you know what, that's not really what I want to do. I want to work with people. I'm not really money oriented. And so my family is very much service oriented. And so I just decided that I thought I would enjoy it. And so I withdrew from the MBA program, applied to law schools. I went to a private university up in New York. And so I was really looking for the best school that I could go to and afford, which turned out to be Chapel Hill. So I came down to Chapel Hill. Had a great experience in Chapel Hill, really, all the way around. I really enjoyed it.
And what year was that you graduated from law school?
Graduated from law school in 92.
92.
Yeah.
So take us through your career from there, graduating UNC Law in 92. Take us through your career.
I was fortunate enough coming out of law school to get a clerkship with a federal judge here right in Raleigh, Judge Dupree, and worked for him for 2 years as a clerk here in the federal district court, which was, obviously a great experience. He was actually in the tail end of his career at that point. And I had clerked with a couple of firms, had already actually taken, he actually got cancer and I accepted a job up in Chicago with a firm called Jenner and Block. And then when he got better, they let me come and do it anyway. So when I finished up that clerkship, my wife and I both, we got married in 94. And then we both moved to Chicago, practiced law in Chicago for several years. While I was with Judge Dupree, I met Ed Gaskins. He tried a case in front of Judge Dupree. And I loved Ed that was just my initial reaction. And so decided we wanted to come back, like Chicago, not so much practicing law in Chicago. And so we came back and I started working for Ed. He hired me. We came back. Deanna ended up at the state bar. And about a year or two later, I went over and sort of was doing prosecution of disciplinary cases in front of the state bar. And then I was there for, I think, 6 years. And then left and started my own practice representing lawyers and other professionals. And then about 3.5 years later, Deanna left, and we've been in that firm now close to 20 years doing, basically professional licensing, defense and prosecution at this point.
And was your wife in your law school class?
She was in my law school class, but we did not actually meet really in earnest until she was clerking on the Court of Appeals. I was clerking in the district court. We happened to live in the same apartment complex. We really didn't know each other in law school, even though we were in the same class.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I would have assumed that you would have known. That's so funny.
That would be logical. But no, we met actually going back to Chapel Hill for an event for clerks. And that's kind of how we first met. And we met, started dating, and we were engaged in 6 months and married in less than a year. So so far it's stuck. It's been over 30 years.
So tell us about, this is the first I've had the perspective of having a husband and wife who took this career trajectory together. Tell me about working with Deanna those years.
We also used to joke around like, oh, we worked great together if we could just get some clients. And we were both doing different things. But yeah, we actually work well together. It's kind of funny because, we obviously live together, we work together. But I probably interact with her less than most everybody else in the firm. Just because she has her separate practice. She mostly advises attorneys. I do a lot of other work. And so, it's worked out really well. She mostly manages the firm. It's worked out well. We hired a number of people. And so, like I said, there's 4 or 5 other people in the firm, and I probably interact with her the least professionally, not on purpose, just the way she kind of has her own practice and I kind of have my own. But yeah. And it's nice because when we want, at least for a long time. When we wanted to make a decision, it's like, okay, what do you want to do? And we'd have a 5-minute conversation and we'd decide what we want to do rather than endless partner meetings and and discussions about it. So I like that part of it. It's worked out well for us. It's not for everybody, but it works for us.
Talk to me about, if you look back, you said 1992 and you go through now, talk about the changes to the profession and the changes that you've seen here in Wake County.
So, I think the biggest, there's obviously been a number of changes. I remember when I worked with Judge Dupree, he was old school. He practiced in the 50s and up. He had just an amazing memory. He could actually dictate a brief into a microphone from scratch, from without any, and it would come out almost perfect, which is, unbelievable. And he thought word processors were the scourge of the legal profession because everybody just copies and pastes and, it's not. So, that had already happened. I remember distinctly being in Chicago, just associate in a huge firm, when emails really started becoming prevalent just as I was leaving. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. That sort of the email, the electronic, there's been a lot of good things about it. It's how we're able to run our firm. But I think the biggest thing that it does is that everybody expects an answer immediately. And so getting time to concentrate and really focus and delve into a subject, for at least for me, and I think for most people, has just become very challenging. You kind of have to force times. And I think that's part of what makes lawyers do well, is when they really can dive into things and they're not going. So I think that's been one of the challenges. But of course, it's brought a lot of great things too. It can be a very efficient way to communicate. Being able to store documents electronically. We have almost no paper files anymore. I love that aspect of it. So it's certainly not all bad. I think there's some very positive parts. And that electronic transition to electronic documents happened just about the time Deanna and I started our firm back in 2006. So, at least it was starting. And to me, that's been a huge positive change. It does make it a little bit more impersonal. You don't see people quite as much, as depending on what type of work you do.
And you started your firm 20 years ago. So that's a great deal of change in our area.
Sure.
Talk about opening the firm then, and then just in the last 20 years at HCC.
Fortunately, at least for the folks who get actively involved in the Wake County Bar, we've been able to keep a really high level of collegiality and professionalism. Not universally, obviously, nowhere's that way. But I think the Bar Association has been a huge part of that. I think they do a great job with it. It's certainly changed. Again, not to harp on the electronic part, but one of the things that Ed really emphasized when I got back was just the personal interaction with lawyers, and the fact that, for most practice areas, you have to deal with the same people all the time, and you need to treat them respectfully, ideally meet with them. Don't just send off emails or electronic or even letters. That's one thing I did not like in Chicago. It was very adversarial, impersonal. And I think the bar here, even now, I know it's changed some, but I think now it's still a really good environment generally.
And talk about, through the years, how you manage the caseload and the work. And I know that's a challenge for so many lawyers. Tell us about that.
I think, I've prosecuted cases at the bar, and I've been defending them for 20 years, and there is a clear bell curve with people. You would think that most of the grievances and disciplinary action happen early in your career, but in reality, it's usually in about the 20 to 35 year mark. Being sort of on the tail end of that bell curve now, and 30 plus years in practice, I understand it a lot better, because I think as you get to that, your caseload just gradually or sometimes suddenly really increases, and trying to figure out how to manage that and keep all the balls in the air. And the most important thing to me, to really directly answer your question, is having people that work with you who help keep up with that. It used to be early in my career where I could largely keep up with all that myself. But now, between our firm administrator, our paralegal, and other lawyers in my office, I think that's leaning on other people and getting good people around you is one way to try to. And also, and this is a lesson that lawyers, because they want to help people, have a hard time learning, is learning how to say no, and going with your gut instinct about cases or clients that come in that you know probably aren't a good idea, and you take them anyway. I've learned over time to trust that instinct and not take those cases on, because then they end up being the ones that you can't sort of manage and keep up with. So, it's not perfect. I struggle with it even today. It's sometimes on a daily basis, but I think those are tools that I've tried to use and I think can be effective in helping. Saying no is maybe the most important one, which is hard to do, especially when you have your own practice and, you have to bring work in, especially when you have other people that work for you.
A lot of lawyers say this, and I want to hear what you think and your take on this. Through your career, talk about the importance of mentorship, be that who you had as mentors starting out, and then now if you have mentees, tell us about those relationships.
I mean, they're essential. I still remember stuff from people that, I was lucky enough to have quite a few mentors because I didn't stay in one place necessarily. Ed Gaskins, I already mentioned, Judge Dupree, who unfortunately wasn't alive too much longer after I clerked with him, but certainly I learned a lot from him, from Ed Gaskins. I worked under Carolyn Bakewell and many other, really good lawyers. And so just picking up just kind of the basic, not only just, watching what they do, but also just, Ed, for example, I remember when I first came back, and like I said, I left Chicago partly because the legal atmosphere there was just very, very contentious and hostile, which I didn't care for. And one of the things he would insist on is, if you're going to file an adverse motion against a lawyer, like a Rule 11 or something else, that he would say, you've got to at least try to sit down and meet with that lawyer and hear their side of the story before you take that kind of action. And to this day, I've never filed a Rule 11 motion against another lawyer. And I think that kind of thing, it's not even so much the substance as just sort of how you conduct yourself. It's harder these days in a big bar like this, and people on their own. I think that's why the mentorship program has been helpful here, because it is really important to sort of learn how to conduct yourself, learn the importance of dealing with clients, understanding while you may have 100 cases going on, that their case is the most important thing to them, and you have to try to convey that to people. That's not necessarily logical or something that you would pick up without. Some people naturally would, but I think those types of things really, make a huge difference in mentoring. And it's still out there. It's harder. A lot of pressure on bigger firms to bill hours and be out and do all these things, and the mentoring can partially fall, by the wayside. Same with smaller firms. Everybody's busy. So, but to me, it's extremely important, and I think it's part of why we've been able to maintain a good professionalism, collegiality here in Wake County. Is I think it's not as much as it used to be, but it's certainly still there to a significant degree, I feel like.
Yeah.
And my son's now an ADA. Our son is an ADA here in Wake County, and there's a lot of that goes on in the courthouse. I don't do a lot of courtroom work anymore. It's more in the administrative context, but I think they do a lot of that, and then back and forth, just informally, not anything formal programs.
Tell us about, we touched on it. Talk to us about ethical dilemmas that you faced through your career, and what you would tell a younger lawyer facing an ethical dilemma in their law practice.
Usually the most significant ones for me are ones that involve other lawyers and sort of how to handle that. Following up on Ed's general advice, not just with Rule 11, but I usually try to give lawyers the benefit of the doubt and give them a chance to either explain where they're coming from or, at least fix it if they've made a mistake. I think, and that's for those kinds of dilemmas, I always try to allow the lawyer to, unless it's really blatant and something that you can't look past, to try to allow them to address it or at least to understand where they're coming from. And I think that really helps with the collegiality. There are other ethical dilemmas. We have conflicts that come up. They're fairly, you just work through what you do and just always try to keep what's in the best interest of the clients, even if it's not necessarily what you want to do. Fortunately, I haven't had a lot of situations where the client was insisting on taking an action. I have those, but for me, maybe it's just a point in my career. If a client insists on doing something that I don't agree with, that I'm unwilling to do, I just tell them, look, I'm not going to do that. And if you don't, if you can always, you're always free to hire somebody else, but I'm just not going to take that step. So, I mean, I think being willing to walk away from a client, obviously not to prejudice them, but I think that gets harder as the financial pressures. It may be a really bad financial decision, but it's usually a good ethical decision. If you're not comfortable doing something, just you can't do it. You shouldn't do it. So that's kind of, I mean, there are others, but I think that's part of the way I work through those ethical issues. And I have my wife, who's an ethics attorney for other lawyers. So really, the first thing I do is go talk to her. But yeah, I mean, personally, that's kind of how I've worked through that. Most of mine have related to interactions with other lawyers. Really, maybe it's because we defend lawyers that I tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they're not. They're not always right. But I usually try to get the other perspective at least.
Yeah. So, you were talking about your wife and your son and all that. Tell us about, through your career, your life outside the law. When you're traveling, your family. Tell us about it.
Right. So we have two sons. One of them swore he wouldn't become a lawyer and now is. And the other son, they luckily live here in Raleigh. Both of them, we now have a almost 2-year-old granddaughter and another one on the way. It's as good as they say it is. It's very exciting. We do travel. We traveled a lot with them when they were younger. Like I never had been west of the Mississippi before I got to college. I mean, we just didn't have the money to travel. But we've done a lot of international traveling with them just to kind of expose them to other ideas and cultures and sites and all that. And Deanna and I have traveled quite a bit extensively. We have, I was telling you about the trip we took to Chile just last time, but we've got a group of people that we've traveled with for about 12 or 14 years now, where we just take trips. So basically, we've been on every continent except Antarctica and Australia to usually to cycle around. It's a great way to see stuff, just getting exposure to other ideas and cultures and seeing how other people operate. And back during the pandemic, we also bought a Mercedes van that we travel around. Don't have as much time as I would like to do it. I think a year from now, we're hoping to actually take it out west and go and see all the national parks and areas out west. But yeah, we love to travel.
And how important is that for that elusive work-life balance thing that so many lawyers strive to do? Why is having things like family and travel, and why is that important?
I think it's important for a lot of reasons. I think for a balance perspective, and I tend to take vacations where I'm not very accessible because I think it's so hard to unplug now. It's so hard to get away. Everywhere you go, you have your phone, and you're connected to everything. And so for me, at least, when I go away, I may look. Like first thing in the morning, I'll look and see what's there and I'll send it to somebody to handle. But other than that, I get away from work. And I think to me, that's essential. I mean, if you work hard, as most lawyers do, being able to take periods of time to disconnect. And you always think you can't do it, but until you actually, I mean, we've taken 2 weeks at a time pretty regularly for the last 10 years. Haven't gone too far past that. But as I said, next fall, we're hoping to be out for 2 months. And I just think you need to refresh, even though it's hard to do, and really resist dealing with client matters other than to get them to somebody who can handle them. To me, it's very important to kind of keep your enthusiasm for continuing to work. We actually said that we were going to retire at 55, and we're, as Dana keeps reminding me, we're a good 4 years past that. But it's partly because, I mean, we just like what we do. And it's and that's partly because I think we've tried to get away from it as much as, when we can, and come back with a better perspective.
That is very good advice, I think, for all of us, for sure. I want to ask you about the future of the profession. So what do you see as the future of the legal profession, particularly here in Raleigh-Wake County?
I know there's a lot of talk about AI replacing so much of what people do, not just in the legal profession, everywhere. And nobody knows really where that's going to go. But I do think there's a lot of aspects There are certain parts of it that transactional, I think, is going to get increasingly difficult. And there's a lot of pressures by larger companies to get as much of that done without. But I think the personal interaction with people, that's not going to be lost. People crave that. They don't want to just look up something in a search engine and that be done with it. So I think that's always going to be important. I think people who are, in a in-person courtroom type environment, I think that will continue. It's going to change, obviously, because we're going to have a lot more access. The part the practice of law has already speeded up so much that I'm afraid that's just going to it's going to speed it up even more. But, I run into a lot of exceptionally bright young lawyers who are and we just hired somebody this year. And so I'm optimistic about it, but I think it's certainly going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a lot of flux. And I think everybody in law school these days and young lawyers are thinking, I know my son was like, I need to get into something that AI is not going to replace me. And I think that personal interaction, I don't think that's ever going to go away. So I think it's still very important. People want to hear it from somebody. And sometimes the answer that you get looking stuff up, the resources are good, is not really very helpful or adequate. So I think there's still going to be an important role for lawyers.
And my last question is, what is it, you think back to your 1992 self finishing law school and then now your 2026 self. What would you tell maybe your son, maybe something, but maybe someone's just starting out, a new attorney? What's your best advice to them?
I would say, number one, you need to have personal interactions, preferably in person, but video is better than others. I say this a lot when I do like the professionalism program. It's like, I'm not against technology. It's great. It's a great resource, but it doesn't replace personal interactions. And just to keep those, one thing I've told people for years, not just now, is, if you want to continue in this profession, and probably for any profession, but certainly the law, the first and most important thing is find something you like doing. The first several years I was out, was not really enamored. I was in a big firm doing stuff that really didn't seem very meaningful to me, and I wouldn't have stayed there. I would have probably done something else. So I think that's the first thing. And the other thing I tell people is, hopefully find something that you like doing that not everybody else is doing. Just because there are tons of personal injury lawyers or workers' comp or whatever it might be, that's a lot of competition. There are a lot of more sort of niche areas that you can, you need to like it, but try to find something you like, something that you're not going to get replaced doing, and also something that not everybody else is doing. I've seen a lot of people over my career sort of find those spaces, even if they're like subparts of an area that maybe is well populated, but they get into a smaller area there. It just helps you separate yourself and hopefully make it more enjoyable. So I think there's a lot we don't know. So I think that's, but those things have persevered over time, I think.